Oops. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to the Sunday live stream where we talk about photography and time to time I'll choose a topic. I'm going to try and do that more often so we can be a little bit more focused in the streams. And as many of you know, I bought the OM1 maybe 6 weeks ago now, somewhere late February, early March. And I've been having a great time with it. It's really gotten me into bird photography, an area that I've always been terrible at, and now I can at least have some hope of capturing some birds in flight. And I'm sorry if I look a little bit unkept. I try to, you know, straighten up before I get on, but I just came back from a photo walk this morning because I wanted to get some more images specifically for the topic today, which is I'm going to be comparing my 75 to 300, which I've had for several years now, against my new recent purchase, the Olympus 300mm f4. And right now, this is Bird Month or something for OM systems. And, these lenses are on sale. So I put the links down below. If you want to support the channel, you can purchase through the affiliate links below. Or if you just want to support the channel in general, I also have links down below for that as well. It's greatly appreciated. And uh, long story short, 75-300 is an excellent lens, especially for the price. And I think you'll see when I start comparing images between the two cameras or between the two lenses, you'll see that you're not really losing much by going with a much cheaper lens in terms of just sharpness in general. Now, of course, the 300mm f4 Pro is sharper, faster by a stop and 2/3. I mean, almost 4 times as much light uh, with the 300 f4 Pro, and the weather sealing. But the compromise is, and also better image stabilization with the 300mm. It's very subtle. It's very subtle, to be honest, because the in-camera stabilization on the EM1s and the OM1 are very good already. And the extra sync stabilization you get in the 300mm f4 Pro helps a little. In with respect to when I'm looking through the viewfinder, I can definitely see a difference between the two in terms of image stabilization, which I don't know how critical it is at this point. It's still too early for me to make a call on that. Because we're shooting at generally very high shutter speeds when we're doing birds in flight type photography. And that's what I'll be focusing on in this video, is actually bird photography, not so much birds in flight. I didn't get too many today uh, in the comparisons. But when it comes to autofocus speed, the 75 to 300 is awesome. And it can certainly handle 20 frames per second with continuous autofocus, is what I'm finding. I usually back it off to 10 frames per second because I found 20 frames per second is a lot in most situations. But there's times when you want to get the maximum frame rate, and going to 20 frames per second. I guess you go to 25, but again, it's that's a lot of images to cull through when you get back home, right? So I'd say in general usage and day to day, just general photography for birds, you will not be disappointed with the 75 to 300. You certainly won't be disappointed with the 300 f4 Pro if that's within your budget, or if that's a lens you're thinking about upgrading to, like I did, because there's a lot of other choices out there to consider. And if I could, I'd buy them all, right? But I had to make a choice, and I decided to skip the 100 to 400 and the uh, 40 to 150 f2.8 Pro with the teleconverters, which would give you the equivalent focal length. You only lose like a stop of light. It's not bad, right? And certainly, if you have the 40 to 150 Pro, I'd recommend just get the teleconverter, the 1.4, and that'll get you there, like probably 99% overall. Because if the 75 to 300 is close already, the 100 to 400 is a little better. The 40 to 150 with a teleconverter is probably a little better than that, if not equivalent. And then going all the way to the 300 f4 Pro uh, is a little better than all of them, right? Again, but there's compromises. Again, you don't have that zooming ability, so you have to be really good at tracking, right? If particularly if the birds are moving pretty fast, like a swallow. I think with a little practice, you'll get pretty good at tracking eagles or osprey, larger birds, geese. You won't have any problem if you're stuck at 300 millimeters, like on the Pro. You will have a little bit of trouble with the smaller birds. And there is that red dot sight available that will help you, compose the image or find the birds in the frame. I don't have experience with that, but people use it and like it. But ultimately, I think you don't need it. You can practice and get pretty good at tracking birds and finding them pretty quickly, even at 300 millimeters. But there's certainly no substitute when you have to zoom out. Sometimes 300 is just too close. But what we're going to do primarily, what I'm going to focus on is comparing the images side by side. And I took some images the other day, and I took some more this morning. And I didn't want to do like test charts and static type scenes where you can definitely probably make measurements and things. I don't have the equipment to measure differences and see those kind of differences. I just wanted to take the lenses out and shoot with them in the field and capture real life things, right? Real world type photography, and show you, because in a test scene, you can't, you can control things, right? That's the whole point of setting up a test studio scene. But I think that's been done to death, right? You can find those online everywhere. But I wanted to just take them out side by side and shoot the same thing in good light. So that's the other thing, is that's the drawback, I'd say, with the any other choice over the 300 millimeter f4 Pro, is you really have to be in good light. You have to be in good light with the 300 f4 Pro. Never mind, with the slower lenses like the 75 to 300 or the 100 to 400. So that's kind of an overview of what I think. So let me pull up the chat section and see who's here. And if you have any questions, try to save them until I'm kind of done, pixel peeping these images, because I'll be looking at the images and not at the chat section. So I'll miss it, and it'll just be easier for me to find it later. But I see Randy's here. Oh, Randy, I saw your video of your bird feeder. That was cool. And if there's any other quick questions here. Oh, Robin Wong is here. Hey, Robin, how you doing? It's always good to see you. Robin has some terrific videos on these lenses, and all the lenses, I believe, that you can check out. And he's gotten really amazing bird shots with his in his videos. Wade's here, Marsha, all the usual suspects, Plato. So let me just see if there was any quick questions up front that I can answer before we get started. And if you don't know who Robin Wong is, he has a terrific channel here on YouTube, Robin Wong. And if you're into photography, particularly Olympus, but really any kind of photography, he has some amazing content, long story short. And he's a really great photographer. He has a great Instagram account, And I highly recommend checking him out. All right. Let's see. System Natura. System Natura has the dream lens, right? The 150 to 400. Oh wow, it's back from almost. Must have been something happened to it. I can't remember. You may have mentioned that before. Did I invest in some green can? No, not quite there yet. Okay, so let me. Oh, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. So again, really the best time to go birding is in good light. If it's cloudy and you get your ISOs up in the 6,000s, 10,000, 20,000, almost doesn't matter what lens you use. But okay, let's look at some images. Let's get right into it. I mean, I imagine a lot of people have been thinking about the 75 to 300 or thinking about upgrading from the 75 to 300. And again, my advice is if you can, the 100 to 400 is a nice upgrade. If you already have the 40 to 150 f2.8 Pro, just get a teleconverter. But if you don't have anything yet, and money no object, get the 300 f4 Pro. But if you're not sure about birding and how much you're going to do it, of course, just get the 75 to 300. It's on sale right now for $450 here, and other places about the same. It's an amazing lens. All right. Let's see. Here we go. So, just a quick overview. The red colored boxes thumbnails are the 75 to 300, and the green colored boxes are the 300 millimeter f4 Pro. So let's go back. And like I said, I did my best. With wildlife, it's hard to frame shots exactly the same, but we're really close on a lot of these. So this goose here, right, is very, very close to me. It's probably only 3 or 4 meters away from me. And the first thing I noticed, and it may not be obvious in this image, is that the 300 f4 Pro seems to crop in a little bit more, like it has a little bit more reach than the 300, 75 to 300. Now that may be due to focus breathing, partially. I think that's part of it. But for the most part, they're very close. But the 300 millimeter is just a little bit tighter than the 75 to 300. In practice, it's not a big deal, but just a very fine point. So let's punch in. I'm going to reset these real quick. I have a preset here that resets them back to, and I'm going to check if they're cropped at all. Okay, they're not cropped. So this is an uncropped image right here. And again, the greens are the 70, the green is the f4 Pro. And you can see there's a green box down here and a red box over here. So this is the 300 75 to 300 in red and 300 f4 Pro. And then let me just align these up. And we're at a 200% crop here. Let me highlight both of these. And I'll leave this window up because I may want to make some adjustments. But you can see that at about 3 meters, 10 feet or so, the 300 millimeter f4 Pro here on the left is sharper. And let me just back that off a little bit. Whoops, let me sync these. Dang it. Sorry, bear with me a second here. So the question is now, is there a slight back focus or front focus on these images, right? So we can go around to the rest of the duck, and you can see the sharpness difference continues. Except right here, it looks like I might have back focused a little bit here, because this looks a little sharper than the 300 f4 Pro. But for all intents and purposes, the 300 f4 Pro is sharper here. Although, you know, the 75 to 300 is very close. And like I said, I'm pixel peeping. I'm at 100, and you can see the percentage down here. But when you back off and just look at these images, and if you process them a little bit, you're going to get a great shot either way, right? With either lens at this point. And if we look at the EXIF data, there are some substantial differences here as well. And this was my first day, but they're both at 1/1000th shutter speed. And that's the other thing I tried to do, is to make sure I kept the shutter speed, you know, at least double the focal length. In this case, I'm more than double, just to minimize any kind of motion blur. And but I do have the stabilization on both lenses, and the sync image stabilization on the 300 f4 Pro. But look at the ISO here on the 300 f4, and that's because I can go down to f4, whereas on the 75 to 300, the aperture's higher, right? I could have went to 6.7, but the camera, for some reason, I was at 7.1. So when you take into account that the 75 to 300 is at 1000 ISO versus 320, the differences between these images are even less, right? Because, you know, when you crank your ISO up, you start to lose a little bit of detail, and you can see a little bit of noise down here versus, you know, it's cleaner over here. So I'll let you guys soak that in for a minute, and just get an idea of the difference. There may be some slight differences in color, because as you can see on this day, what I did is I used the OM1 with the 300, and I used the EM5 Mark III with the 75 to 300 on this day. So there's going to be differences in colors because they're different sensors and white balance and all of that, right? But the way and just another note is, my naming convention on my files is, this is the OM1, so I put the number first if it's the 1. So I do OM1. In this case, it's the EM5 Mark III, so that's why that's named that way. It's just something I do internally. helps me know which camera I'm using without having to jump back out and look at the EXIF data and things. But anyhow, and I will post these comparisons and things onto my Flickr page later. I just haven't had time to do it yet. But I think the 75 to 300 at that distance did well. Now this is something very far away. My guess would be this duck here, and this is uncropped. This duck was probably 15 to 20 meters away, if I had to guess. And you know, this is probably about as far away as of a duck or of a bird that you want to take. Because when you get down to, if I were to crop in, let's just punch in real quick and look at this comparison. And I'm going to get rid of the info there. Well, let's look at the EXIF real quick. 1/500th of a second, f6.7 at ISO 200, 1/500th at f8, ISO 250. So for all intents and purposes, these are at about the same settings. And we are cropped in, just to give you some perspective with respect to megapixels. This is roughly Oh, the crop data didn't update. Hold on. It normally tells me the cropped size here. Why is it not showing me? Here, developed. Okay, here it is. 943 by 707. So if we multiply that out, 943 times 707. We're cropped into about 0.66 megapixels. 0.66 megapixels at this magnification. So that's what I mean. When you crop in this much, there's not going to be much detail left to begin with. So let's reset that and compare. Let's sync these. Get my navigator. We need to go over here. All right, so without cheating, you know, which lens is which, right? There is so little difference here at this distance. So you have, mainly because there's probably some atmospheric distortion and what is it? Haze, whatever. But when you start shooting something really far away, the differences between the lenses even get less, right? Unlike the previous image where we were very close, you can see in this image it's, you know, when the things are very far away, there's very little difference. And another thing we can look at on this one is the bokeh. Now on the 300 f4 Pro here on the left, you'll notice that the bokeh is a little bit busy, right? We have these like weird lines here, and someone suggested that this might be the IBIS causing this. So I'm going to experiment a little bit, because when I had my UV filter on, it amplified this distortion by tenfold. It was like unbearable when I had the UV filter on. So I don't have my UV filter on here like I had talked about in previous videos. And but you can see the bokeh is a little bit busier here, but that's with IBIS on, you know, sync IS and all of that. There's a little bit of busyness here, but not like on the 300. But when we look at these two images, and I'm going to let it sit here so that YouTube, you know, pixelation and all that will catch up. You can see that there's virtually no difference between these two lenses here. Whoops. In the center. Now let's go out a little bit. And I know this is on a slightly different focal plane, but you'll notice that the turtle here on the 75-300 is a little bit smudged, where it's still pretty sharp here on the 300 f4 Pro. And that's where the Pro lenses sort of pick up in terms of, you know, you know, you're paying for it, right? You're paying for corner to corner sharpness, basically. And clearly the, you know, like I can see some detail here in the wood over here. It's a little bit soft and smudged when we get out to the corners. So yeah, you know, you're paying for that in the 300, you would hope, right? You get some benefit in the corners. But in the center, generally in the center, you know, it's like no way on earth would I tell somebody to spend the money on a 300 f4 Pro if this is the kind of picture they're going to take all the time. You know, it just, but it's not what we do all the time. I'm just saying that somebody might just say, forget it. Why spend money on a 300 f4 Pro? And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make in this live stream in general is, you know, the argument for the f4 Pro is pretty thin at this point, right? But you'll see later some other differences here that might want to make you consider the 300 f4 Pro. All right, here's something right at, this is a barn swallow. And this is at virtually the minimum focusing distance. I mean, I'm less than 2 meters away, like maybe 4 or 5 feet from this swallow here. And if we punch in, and let me just line these up. And this is my thumbnail. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that. This one and this one. Let me get these. And let's just peek at the EXIF data again. 300 f4 Pro at f8, ISO 320, 1/500th, f6.7. Okay, so we're pretty close again in terms of settings. I mean, not enough that there should be a difference. You can see the noise creeping in already, though, even at ISO 320 here in the bokeh. And again, the 300 f4 Pro here is sharper on the eye, albeit it's very, very subtle. It's very difficult to tell, right? And these are uncropped, meaning, you know, we're at 143% again. When we go down onto the shoulder, you can see some sharpness here. It's a little bit softer here. Let's go down to the wing. So again, is this a micro focusing difference, or is this a difference in the lens sharpness? It's hard to say. And let me sync the settings. Let me just make sure I didn't do anything here. Okay. We'll go down a little bit. Definitely some very, very fine micro focusing differences here. But also we're getting down to the corners of this lens, right? On the 75-300. This is closer to the bottom left corner. And this is where the sharpness really drops off. Because if you look at this cracked paint down here versus over here, I think our focus point is exactly the same based on that. But there's definitely some softness here that I think is more related to the quality of the lens versus any minor micro focusing differences. Let's go over here again. So overall, again, I think the 300 f4 Pro is definitely sharper. But when you look at the normal normal view, right? Not pixel peeping. These are both excellent images. And you know, I think anyone that has the 75-300 should not be unhappy with this kind of images. Especially right in here. Again, you can see the 300 f4 Pro is magnifying a little bit more, whether it's focus breathing or it just has slightly more magnification at 300 millimeters. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. So this is something very, very close versus what we just looked at before with the mallard duck was very far away. So these are two extremes, right? And I would say that hawk, we didn't look at the hawk yet. This goose was kind of medium distance away, right? 3-4 meters versus 15 to 20 meters versus this is less than 2 meters, right? Okay, let's look at this hawk. So we have 1/4000th of a second f4, ISO 400. Over here, ISO 400, but at f8. So f8 I found is kind of the sharpest, the sharpest point, best aperture for the 75-300. So I had enough light to shoot this at f8 ISO 400. So let's go ahead and let me make sure this is zeroed out. Oh, I was off by a stop on this. So let me add that back in. Okay, maybe not quite a stop. Close enough. All right. So let's pixel peep in and bring these out. So this hawk is probably at most 25 feet from me, maybe let's just say 25 feet, whatever that is in meters, about 8 meters away, so medium distance. And this is a cropped image. Let me show you what the original image was like. So I cropped in, let's undo this. So this image, I just want to give you an idea of how much we're cropping in to look at these images, right? And okay, so we'll give that a second to unwind. So here, at this part of the image, the 300 f4 Pro is again sharper, but not by like night and day. I mean, it's very subjective, right? What I say is a very small difference. Someone else might say it's a huge difference. So just don't, I'm being very, it's a very subjective term when I start talking about differences. But that's why I'm showing it, because I want you to see, and you can use your own, adjectives, substitute your own adjectives, that like these are huge differences or these are small differences. Whatever you think it is, it's up to you. But for me, these are very small differences between these two lenses. But definitely the 300 f4 Pro is still sharper, right? And if we go down, again, just to make sure that I'm not doing any kind of micro focusing differences, this one needs to be just a tad brighter in the shadows. Let me just bring it up a little bit. Definitely hear the feathers and stuff all the way around. There's definitely more contrast, a little bit less softness, right? And as we keep going down, you can look at the stick here. A little bit more detail, a little bit sharper, but not bad. And then as we get down to the corners, and we're not really in a corner here, but the 75-300 is holding up really, really well. So let me just punch in to one part here, and I'll just let this hang here. Because again, I know sometimes when you play back or you're watching this live, there's some pixelation that happens on YouTube. But if I let it sit here, it'll, the baud rate and all of that, baud rate, listen to me, so old school. will will catch up. And I wow, there's a huge difference here in the lighting somehow. But yeah, really, it's amazing how good this 75-300 is in comparison. And then let's do one far away again. Where's my? Oh, here and here. So let me reset these. So I did mess up the exposure a little bit when I was doing these in the field. All right, close enough. Maybe. All right, that's good. So what are our settings here? Oh, and let me show you how much we're cropped in also. All right. So again, this time this little tiny bird is 50 feet. I don't know, maybe 20 meters, depending, whatever scale, makes sense to you. And then let's just crop in. Now this is the same bird, just in the one shot, the wind is blowing. And then let me pop up the EXIF data. So we're at f8 on the 75-300 at ISO 500 and f4 on the Pro lens. And unlike when we were shooting the duck, I can see a bigger difference here at distance. On the first image with the mallard duck, with the green head, I think, I didn't see as big a difference at distance. But on this image, I do. And I don't think it's micro-focusing differences. I think in this particular shot, the 75-300 is just softer. Because if we go down a little bit, like on the log, you can see more detail. And it's just not as soft. It's just crispier, right? And then there's the other bird. Same thing. It's a little bit softer in here versus over here. And that's where we are, full frame. And this is where we're at, cropped in. And I'll let that settle for a minute. This is a really cool looking bird, especially when the wings expand out. And I think it has some yellow in it and stuff. I'm going to have to, but I don't see this bird very often when I'm out there. But I'd like to catch one in flight, right? But okay, so those are some excellent, I think, examples and when comparing these two lenses. And as you can see, when you're in good light and can get a decent shutter speed and a low ISO, you're going to get very, very similar images. Clearly the 300 is sharper, but it's not night and day. It's not like, you're going to be unhappy with either lens, I think. So let's do this. The shots from here on out I took this morning, and but I did some additional stuff this morning. I was very careful to match the ISO and shutter speed and all of that this time, because when and I used the same camera, so I was swapping lenses on my OM1 instead of like when I was out the other day. I had the EM5 Mark III and the OM1. This time I'm using the same camera, just swapping lenses. And I'll have to tell you a little funny thing that happened while I was out this morning because of that. But Let's pick the same hawk as came back. All right, and let me make sure that I've zeroed these out. Okay. All right, so this one's in a little bit less light. Let me just crank it up a third. Whoops, wrong one, this one. Let's give it a little bit more light so we can see. So you can see that, again, the 300 f4 Pro has a little bit more magnification than the oh, well, no wonder. I was at 258. My mistake. I was so careful to get the settings to match best I could, and then I wasn't paying attention to the focal length. I just took these this morning. I'm sorry, but let's look at these anyway. What an idiot! I can't believe I did that. I didn't zoom all the way out. Oh, but there you have it. Both images are really, really close. You know, the details and the sharpness and everything. So little difference between these two lenses. And in this case, the hawk was probably, again, I would say 8 or 9 meters away, or about 20, 25 feet from me in a tree. And this is the full frame, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah, that's the entire frame we're looking at. Other than I didn't zoom in all the way. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, now let's look at these two. I processed these a little bit in Lightroom, and with a little bit of processing, you can get these almost identical. You can see the colors and everything match up a lot better now too, right? Versus using the two different cameras. But yeah, it's pretty amazing how good the 75-300 when you're not trying to shoot something too far away. And then let me show you one more where I process these in Topaz Sharpen, and it just gave it a little bit more bite, right? Little bit more sharpness in the feathers and things on both birds. So this is with Topaz Sharpen. Just to give you an idea, if you want to take the image a little bit further, make it a little crispier, reduce a little bit of the noise and the bokeh and stuff, you can get some great detail in either lens. It's pretty amazing. A little bit of softness here versus I can see a little bit more detail here on the back of the head. Definitely. Okay, and let's look at this is a good example. So here these two, this thing was way out, you know, 100 meters, 100 yards, 300 feet. I mean, this guy was really way out there. This is a blue heron, and let me slightly out of frame. Line these up. So 300 f4 Pro here on the left. Yeah, that's right. 300 f4 Pro. Let's look at the settings. Okay, I am zoomed at 300 millimeters on both. ISO 160 versus ISO 120, both at f8. So these in terms of exposure, These images are identical. And if it looks like the magnification is a little bit more on the 75-300 now, it may be partially that, but it's also, I think this thing moved a little bit, because you can see the grass is different. Because I didn't move, the bird moved a little bit. The bird moved just a little bit, so I don't know which one is closer. But anyhow, you know, it's like, wow, at this kind of distance and cropping in this much to less than 1 megapixel, you're just losing so much detail anyway. If you're in good light, it doesn't matter which lens you're using, as you can see. It's amazing. But there you have it. And I did process these a little bit. Let me see. I cropped in and I processed these using Topaz Sharpen. And even after doing a little bit of sharpening with the Topaz, I really couldn't improve much what was happening without it looking totally over sharpened, right? So I did sharpen as much as I can, to the point to where I felt like it might have been too much. Yeah, there you have it. I mean, 300 f4 Pro versus 75-300 at distance in the real world, right? This is what it looks like, and it's not as significant as you might think. Let's look at another one. These guys were far away. Again, these guys were probably 20 meters away, 50, 60 feet out at least. These are a couple of tree swallows. Oops, let me unlink these. All right. So, I mean, I know I'm going to guess 300 f4 Pro on the left. And okay, yeah, so there's a green dot here. So that's definitely the 75 or 300 f4 Pro. Let's look at the settings. I'm at f4, ISO 800, f8, ISO 800. So the difference is in the shutter speed. Both of them, the shutter speeds are fast enough. On this image here, you can see the 300 f4 Pro did a little better job. If you look at the branch in particular, it's sharper. And as we go down, it's a little sharper. Definitely more bokeh here, right? Because we're at f4 instead of f8, or softer bokeh. And as we go down, yeah, towards the edges of the lens, the 75-300 falls apart a little bit faster. But yeah, I mean, again, I think if you process this a little bit, you're going to be okay. You will get more detail out of the 70 or 300 f4 Pro, but not like night and day difference, in my opinion. You do get more bokeh or shallower depth of field with the 300 f4 Pro, but yeah. All right, let's see. Whoops, wrong button. Okay, so we'll do one last comparison, and then I'm going to talk about some other things. All right, this was a osprey, obviously, eating a fish it caught. And on this, the 75-300 Pro again is a little bit softer. And this Osprey, I mean, you can probably guess was probably, again, maybe 20 meters away, 50, 60 feet away from me. And I was able to frame these up a little bit closer. And I'll punch in it even closer. Here you can see, and this may be a minor, let me just make sure this is resolved. Yeah. Very, very minor difference here again. But the 300 f4 Pro overall is sharper. Like you can see the texture in the legs here and on the tree branch. Oh, why did it jump? And on the tree branch. But we're not taking a picture of a tree branch, right? We're taking a picture of the Osprey. And this is another one I processed a little bit here using the Topaz Sharpen. So let's look at these. Now, when I did the Topaz Sharpen, it brought them really, really close, right? But you can still see a little bit. This halo here got over sharpened on the top of the bird, whereas you have less of that here because it's a sharper lens, right? So for critical sharpness, definitely 300 f4 Pro, right? And then when we get down to the tree branch, the differences between the two are much more subtle. Mainly because our eyes aren't quite as good at distinguishing differences on certain types of subjects, right? We're really good at distinguishing differences on eyes and faces. And it's very, very obvious differences in sharpness and clarity and all of that when we're looking at something like this versus we're looking at a tree, right? So that's why I felt it was important to do real world testing versus a studio test shot, because in a studio test shot, you know, our eyes are just not as sensitive to lines and bars and things as we are to actual real things in life. And that's what I wanted to show everyone is real life type photos. And I matched the exposure here pretty close. It's interesting. There's about a third of a stop difference here on the 75-300. So the 75-300 is letting in a little bit less light at the same aperture, it looks like, but nothing to worry about. But again, I mean, this is where in good light, if you're using the 75-300, you should get great images out of it. And I think that's the end of the images I wanted to compare that I've been taking over the last couple of days. So let me make a couple other notes about my experience in the field. And you know, there's the main difference really for me and why, because I did test the 300 f4 Pro before I made a decision to buy it, and I tested the 100-400. You know, David Crooks has one of those, and he's also getting excellent images. They're actually a tiny bit better than my 75-300. And that's the thing is, these shots, I did my best to put them side by side and compare them and compose them exactly the same, try to get the exposure exactly the same, process them the same. And that's very different than using the lenses in real life, okay? Because I can show you the results, and at this point you're like, why in God's name would somebody spend that much more money for 75 to, or for the 300 f4 Pro, right? But in real life, in practice, in the field, when you're using these two lenses, the 300 f4 Pro focuses faster. I mean, it's like this, right? Whereas the 75 to 300, it hunts a little more. I struggled getting some swallows, those little barn swallows and tree swallows flying. It's a little harder to catch those flying because the 75 to 300 I felt like I was hunting more, and I could not lock focus on them as quickly as I could with the 300 f4 Pro. So the autofocusing way faster on the 300 f4 Pro. The other thing in real life, right, is that almost 2 stops difference in light. Okay, let's say a stop and a half. We'll average it between the 100 to 400 and the 75 to 300, because those are 2 other lenses you might be considering over the 300 f4 Pro. If you're thinking about upgrading the 300 f4 Pro, you're thinking about this too, right? That's a big deal. Letting in 2-3 times, maybe 4 times as much light into the lens. That also helps a ton with the autofocusing. It helps a ton with keeping your ISOs low. It helps you a bunch with your shutter speed. So for example, you know, I'm at 1/1000th of a second on any other lens. On the 300 f4 Pro, I can be at 1/2000th of a second, 1/3000th of a second. You know, I can have a much faster shutter speed at the same ISO. And that's going to allow me to freeze the frame, freeze the action much better than I can with any other lens. So that's another reason you want to think about the 300 f4 Pro, is being able to use that faster shutter speed. And that's a huge difference. So you can use a much faster shutter speed and much faster autofocusing because of the more light. And then all the other benefits, right? Build quality, weather sealing, yada yada. But for just the average person like me, that I'm not going to go out to the Himalayas and shoot with my camera. You know, I'm just going down to the local park, right? These are the main benefits of the 300 f4 Pro, is that extra stop and a half, and that allows for the faster shutter speed and or lower ISO, which ultimately will give you better images. Also, when you're tracking birds in flight and they're flying from one corner of the frame to the other corner to the center, out of the frame and back in, the 300 f4 Pro really is good at keeping focus on that bird and keeping it sharp even in the corners, right? Because you're paying for this corner to corner sharpness on the 300 f4 Pro. And you know, for that kind of stuff too, action, when the birds are just going all over creation, you know, the 300 f4 Pro makes a big difference. And yeah, certainly you have to practice getting the bird in the frame, because it's like a 1.4 degree field of view. But you can definitely, with some practice, I'm getting better, right? With every time I go out, I get better. You're going to be able to keep the bird in the frame and track it. And I think I've shown videos of that before in other streams, where I'm able to track a bird pretty easily. Swallows are still a challenge, but so yeah, so 300 f4 Pro, if it's within your budget, or maybe it's just, you know, it doesn't matter, money's no object for you guys. Some of you guys, I know, you're lawyers and doctors and whatever. You won't have any regrets getting it. And I think it's worth the extra money if you're very serious and hardcore about birding. But if you get the 75 to 300, I would skip and just go to the 300 f4 Pro. I don't think that lenses in between offer enough advantage at the price points they're at for you to go in between. If you don't have a lens yet, and you're not sure how much birding you're going to do, the 75 to 300 is a great budget choice. If you've been trying birding and you want more reach, the 100 to 400 is probably the best value out there at right now it's on sale for like $13.99, because that will be a little sharper. It has the image stabilization in the lens, which will benefit you as well. I don't have enough experience in the field to tell you how much that in lens stabilization helps, but I can see a difference when I'm hand holding and just trying to frame the shot. Having that in lens stabilization is better than not having it. When I was framing birds that were kind of just sitting in a tree or something, that extra stabilization in the lens does help. So the 100 to 400 has that. The 40 to 150 does not. It will give you a little bit more light and maybe a tad bit sharper, but as you can see, when you have enough light, you know, the differences between these lenses are very small, right? And again, that's my terminology. They may be huge for you guys. For some of you, you might be like, there's no freaking way I'd ever shoot with a 75 to 300 after looking at those images. And then some of you are like, there's no way I'd ever buy a 300 f4 Pro after looking at these images, right? So you guys make up your own mind about what you think about those images and the differences. If you're thinking about birding, I don't know how the lenses will perform in other types of photography, because there's all kinds of photography out there that you might have an application for a telephoto lens. Birding is just the only one that I could do, or is what I do with these lenses. I don't use them for portraits or landscapes or portraiture. That's not why I got these lenses. I got these lenses for birding, so that's the kind of images I'm showing you. But if you're doing birding, I think I've shown you enough that you can make an educated decision which lens would be right for you. Or if the 300 f4 Pro is out of budget, which a lot of people tell me, you know, just flat out, I can't afford that lens, which is, you know, that's life, right? You're not going to be unhappy with the 75 to 300, and you're not missing a lot, but you have to be in good light. As soon as the light starts to drop, man, if you go out before sunrise, blue hour, you know, when it starts to get dark, yeah, it's a train wreck when the ISOs start to crank up. And having that extra stop and a half to 2 stops of light is huge in those situations. But just go out when the weather's nice, or set up a bird feeder in your backyard. When the weather's nice, you can go out anytime and do. You've seen all of the images I've taken of in my backyard. If you guys have been to my Instagram and my Flickr, the Flickr is a better page because you can pixel peep those. Let me show you a couple. I'm really proud of some of these. Where's is it this window? Hold on. Because I know some of you guys don't do Flickr and Instagram, so I'm just going to show you here. Oh, I went out with David Crooks. Let me just go to Flickr because I can pixel peep those. This is one I caught yesterday with the 75 to 300, and this is cropped in slightly, but not much. I think it's the original. Yeah, so this is a 3x2. So this is about 6.5 megapixels. So apparently I did crop a little bit from 20, but this came out really good. And of course I processed the heck out of these. Everything you see, not everything, but a lot of things that you see on my Flickr page are processed. But I do mention what I did. Here's a 75 to 300 processed. All the EXIF data is here. And I did make a note here. I added in Photolab 5. Photolab 5 has a terrific optics module. I mean, look at the detail that Photolab 5 pulls out. That's just my software of choice when I can. Unfortunately, right now, the Photolab doesn't support the OM1, so I've had to use Topaz. But once Photolab supports the OM1, I'm gonna start using that. This is some kind of Warbler. I mean, this is virtually uncropped. I mean, this is really tight. This bird just flew like right in front of me. I like this one. My shutter speed, unfortunately, was too slow. So when I sharpened it, it kind of got that painted, glassy look to it. But it was a neat image. I lowered my shutter speed. See, I'm at 1/1000th, I think, right? Yeah, I lowered my shutter speed because the bird was just sitting there. So I was like, okay, let me lower the shutter speed so I can get a better ISO. And then the freaking thing took off. Happens all the time. But the key is just go out every day and eventually you'll get everything, everything will be perfect, right? Everything will be in alignment. Uh, this one here is with the 300 f4 Pro. And you can see um, detail is amazing. Hold on. Okay. It's my mom's birthday today, so I need to keep up with the texts and things because I have to head out. But yeah, come out and look at these are my backyard birds. Well, no, these are the barn swallows. These are my backyard birds. 300 f4 Pro. Um, yeah, and I owe a lot of this to using the OM1, being able to capture these kinds of shots, especially when they're flying. There's just no way I could do this without it. Some of the things I have to improve though is controlling my depth of field because the depth of field is so shallow at f4. I can't. I'm missing focus. Like on this one, the bird's face is out of focus and the wings are in focus. Just the depth of field is just way too shallow. Okay, so let me take a minute here. Catch up on the chat. If you have any questions, this is a good time to ask me. I'll do the best I can to answer them. But let's see. Thank you, Marco. Oh, Randy makes a good point. 300 also works very. I did test for that. Let me show you that image. I forgot. I totally forgot about that. Close-up photography. Let's see. It was in this batch here. I think it was one of the last things I did. Did I nail? It was really windy though. See if I nailed focus on this. Yeah, close enough. All right, in terms of close focusing, they're also very similar. So on the left here, 300 f4 Pro. On the right, 75-300. Both at f8. So the shutters, the settings matched up exactly here. Again, the 300 millimeter f4 Pro does get a little bit closer because you can see like down here in the corner that I got a little bit of this flower here, and then I got the whole entire top of the flower on the 75-300 versus on the 300 millimeter. It's just a tiny bit more magnified. So let's line these up. So this is that needs to resolve. So this gives you an idea of the magnification close up. So it's probably 50% more at this level. And tiny bit more detail, yada yada. But yeah, so the 300 f4 Pro definitely has the ability to get much closer than the 75-300 does. So just another added benefit. if you're doing close-up photography, every little bit is a big deal. Uh, but that's what we were looking at. Okay. Thanks for reminding me, Randy. um, yeah, I have a lot of good variety in my backyard. The trick is to get uh, good bird seed, and you get more variety of birds. I used to buy like the $6 for 20 pounds. It was just mostly those round little balls. But when I got a variety type bird seed with sunflowers, and I don't know, it had like a much better variety. I got a better variety of birds. And then when I bought those suit packs, uh, then I started getting more woodpeckers. And so there's lots of tips online about how to get the most out of your bird feeder. So I won't get into that, but I can tell you that the first time I put the bird feeder out, I used cheap bird food, and it took like a week before they even found or got interested in my bird seed. And then once the certain birds found it, the doves, the crackles, the crows, they all love everything. They'll eat anything. But to get the really nice birds, the blue jays, um, the mockingbirds, the woodpeckers, you have to up your game and spend a little bit more money on some bird seed. And then they find it right away somehow. Word gets out. Go to Rob's house. He's got the good bird seed. Okay. Okay, I didn't see any questions. Rob, would DxO Pure Raw help with the images? Um, yeah, if you're not using the OM1, if you have one of the older Olympus cameras, DxO is better, in my opinion, especially as the ISO gets high. But if you have PhotoLab, you can tweak additional sharpness settings. So that's why I skipped the DxO Pure Raw, which is the separate module, and I just went with the PhotoLab 5 because you have more control over the sharpness settings and optics and other things versus and denoising versus using just DxO Pure Raw. DxO Pure Raw, it's just too limited, and you can export, I think, in PhotoLab 5 differently than you can in DxO. I don't have DxO Pure Raw anymore. It's been a while, and they've updated it since I've used it, so I can't speak to it what it is now, in its current form. But when I tested them, I ended up going with the PhotoLab that included. You have to get the PhotoLab Elite or Supreme or whatever they call it to get the DxO Pure Raw denoising algorithm. But ultimately, it does a better job, or it allows you to do a better job because you have more control over the various settings. But Topaz does a great job too. If the ISO is not too high, like you're 6400 and under, I usually use just Topaz Sharpen. And if the ISO gets high, or the image is very noisy, because you can have noisy low ISO images, right? But if the images get noisy, then Topaz Denoise AI does a better job. And then I might have to run it through Topaz Sharpen after that. So it's a multi-step process. But you can get great results out of it. That said, that's why I prefer PhotoLab 5, is because it does an amazing job denoising, does an amazing job sharpening, and everything else. Any recommended image stabilization settings on the lens or body? I have the 100 to 400. Okay, yeah, definitely when you turn the image stabilization on, the lens switch, and then use lens image stabilization priority on. Those two things, because the stabilization in the lens is more important than the stabilization in the body when you're at telephoto lengths. So make sure the switch is on the lens. Make sure in the camera you have it set to lens image stabilization priority. And then and make sure you have the latest firmware for the 100-400, because apparently they updated it to sync better with the in-body stabilization. So make sure you have the latest firmware on everything, and that will be the best setting. And if you're using very fast shutter speeds, I guess the argument could be made that you don't need image stabilization. The other thing I would make sure is, if the Mark II has this, the M5 Mark II, is turn off or switch to frames per second priority instead of image stabilization priority. That's another setting that may or may not be in the M5 Mark II. Because usually when you're at very fast shutter speeds and you're shooting very fast frames per second, the image stabilization makes less difference, right? Because your shutter speeds are so high, 1/2000th, 1/3000th. In that case, definitely have frame per second priority versus on, selected instead of image stabilization priority. Turn the switch on the lens and turn the other setting in your camera to image stabilization lens priority, which is different than the previous one I talked. So I hope all that makes sense. But those are the settings I would recommend. Okay. I have become a tripod shooter now with big glass. Makes a big yeah. Tripod, yeah. Nothing beats a tripod. You can have image stabilization out the butt, but image stable, a tripod, nothing beats a good sturdy tripod is the way to get tack sharp images every time. No question. And okay, I don't see any other questions here. I guess the pictures spoke for themselves, right? Let's see, is there anything else? I did meet a guy today. I mean, I see him all the time when I go out there, Quan. He has a Sony A1 with the 600mm f4. And I had asked him, oh, sorry, Druid has a comment here. I thought the lens IS priority was only for Panasonic lenses. The Ollie setup will default revert to dual sync is where possible, and in-body where lenses don't have IS. That could be true. If you watch Robin Wong's video on image stabilization, he explains it better than I can. And this point, that what Druid is talking about, is when you're using Panasonic cameras and lenses, and or mixing Panasonic cameras and lenses with Olympus lenses and stuff, the settings can go everywhere, right? And this is where I can't really give any advice. But the advice I gave earlier to Henry, generally speaking, is the way to go, is to use the image stabilization in the lens when possible for telephoto lengths like 400mm, 300mm. That's just good best practice. The Olympus cameras a lot of times will do whatever it wants. If you turn image stabilization on, it'll sync, it'll use one or the other, it'll use both. It's almost a fully automatic process on the Olympus cameras unless you turn it off. But when you start mixing things, that's when it gets a little confusing, and that's when you have to kind of fall back on best practice of using the lens stabilization instead of the body stabilization if available. But that's when you have to do due diligence and start researching the forums and things, what works best with this lens and this body combination. And then users will tell you what their experience is and what's best. I can only speak to what I'm using and how I set things, and the results I'm getting have been you know, fantastic. I couldn't ask for more. I'm not having any image stabilization issues that I can see. I'm not having any, which will be motion blur and things like that. When I have my shutter speed right, I'm not having any problems with the stabilization. Um, and a little bit of video I've done using image stabilization is it's been excellent as well, using the settings I've talked about. But I'm not going to talk about video quite yet using in the OM1. I'm still working out all of the different settings and stuff, and I want to take it out on a job maybe and see how it does. But anyhow, Druid's point basically is you really have to do your due diligence, particularly when you're mixing and matching things. But Panasonic in general, I'm not familiar with what settings you might use there. But the settings I talked about, I know are on the OM1, and at least one of the settings is available on every other Olympus camera. Oh, Robin's still here. Actually, he can probably. Yeah. All right. Hey, Robin, I totally forgot you were still here. Yeah, the 12-100 Pro and the 300 Pro, no matter which you set, lens or body priority, does not matter. So, yeah, so Olympus is just doing it for you, right? Um, and Robin would know. He was a tech at Olympus forever. Um, and what Rob Six said was true for the 100-400. Okay, so I got something right. and and yeah, no, I think a firmware update has changed that. Robin can verify this, but I believe there was a firmware update where the in-lens stabilization works with the camera lens stabilization. So if you have that update, Olympus cameras are going to handle all of the image stabilization automatically unless you turn it off. But I'll default to Robin on that. Well, I don't even have to default. I can just look it up. Olympus firmware update. And let's see, the 100-400. So I don't see one for that lens specifically. Let's look at the M1 Mark III. So there is a focus stacking firmware update. Okay, I don't see anything there. Let me switch the screen so you guys can see what I'm doing. 12. Eco Digital. These are the older lenses, I believe. These are the Panasonics. So I don't see one. How about the M1X? These are all pretty new. 40-150 rec bit. Okay, there is something here. It says here image stabilization performance when using the MZICO 100-400 has been improved. With an asterisk, the rolling compensation is available with the image stabilization function of the body. So yeah, there is a firmware update for the 100 to 400 on the EM1X. And then EM1 Mark III, I don't see it. They added the focus stacking, but they didn't say about the rolling. EM1 Mark II. On the M1 Mark II, they mentioned it also, version 3.3. They mentioned about adding body stabilization working with the rolling. So that's interesting. The M1 Mark III, they don't mention it specifically. Other than, other than image stabilization being improved. So let me put this link in the thing here. So I put a link in the chat for you guys. So look at your body, camera body on here, and see if you have that specific firmware update. Okay. Oh, okay. So the M1 Mark III already has. So yeah, the M1 Mark III came out after the other firmware updates. That would make sense. Then it would already have it built in. Yeah. All right. Robin knows. I don't know why Robin doesn't live stream. He would be awesome. He could answer every question, right? Without having to look it up. You think the EM5 Mark III may have it too. Let me pull it up. EM5 Mark III. Yeah, so EM5 Mark III, its version 1.2 came out in August of 2020. The EM1 Mark III came out after this, very shortly after this. So that makes sense what Robin's saying. In terms of the timeline, since the EM1 Mark III came out after this particular firmware that I'm looking at right here, it would have the rolling shutter compensation, it would have that update anyway. But if you have an older camera, you have to get the firmware update. Gosh, we're up to 1.6 on the firmwares. I don't even know what I'm on. I can't believe it. Whoops. Let's see. I'm on firmware 1.4 on my EM5 Mark III. So if we go here, they fixed the Wi-Fi problem. They added focus stacking for a lens I don't own. Improved the focus. Oh man, I gotta update my firmware. There's like 3 firmware updates since I've updated. That's something. Okay. Oh, this is so true. Happiest man on earth. Happiest photographer on earth, I should say. Robin Wong always makes you smile, right? It's kind of like he's like the Ferrari of the camera world. Whenever I look at a Ferrari, I just kind of smile. Says, oh, nice, And when you see Robin Wong on YouTube, you just kind of smile. It's like, oh, Robin is awesome. Okay. Finding the right tires for your off-roading videos. Oh, can't help you there. I know for the Brigstone They make some for Jeep that are really good, but I can't remember the model of the tire. But Brickstone makes probably, I think, the best off-roading tires, because that's the one those guys in the Jeep forums always recommend. So yeah, go to a Jeep forum and see what tires the people in the Jeep forums recommend, and then get those for your car, whatever it might be. I'm too kind. I'm not. I guarantee everyone here feels the same way about you, Robin. That you know, you're just a mecca for joy and peace and love and all of that. You're not a hippie though. I'm just saying. Let me see. Okay, checking my text. Oh yeah, I need to get ready. Any other questions? So, oh, I was telling you about the A1. Let me tell you that story. So the guy Kwani has a Sony A1 and a 600 millimeter f4, and he let me hold it. It was so heavy. I mean, you can get used to anything, right? I don't know how many pounds it weighs, but it was significantly heavier than my setup, right? And we were both shooting the swallows. I got some good swallow shots today. I'll have to edit them a little bit and post them. Uh, but I asked him about the autofocusing ability, because I didn't pixel view, but I looked in his camera at the images he caught of the swallows, because we were shooting at about the same time, and he got some great shots, and they were all in focus. So the focusing on that Sony A1 is pretty amazing as well. Uh, and having 50 megapixels, because we were at the same focal length, right? But when you crop in, he's got 50 megapixels to crop in with, and I only have 20, right? At the same focal length, because he had a 600 f4, I had my 300 f4. So his images were better, hands down, from what I could see through the EVF anyway. But I asked him, I said, you don't have subject detect tracking on that camera, and how do you focus on different things? And he said it just gets it. When it's not like in the trees and brush, the kind of problems everyone has with any camera system, when it's just out in the sky, uh, it just locks onto it instantly and keeps focus on it the whole time. So even though the focusing system in the menus and everything, there's not as many options, it just works, basically, is what he said. And from the images I scrolled through, no question, it was working really good, really well, I should say. And um, and I also asked him about, well, what about like when the bird is, because I talked about this problem I had last week, right? When the bird is sitting on a branch, but there's branches sitting, let's say this is the bird and there's a branch right in front of the bird. Even though the bird detect sees the bird, right, on my Olympus, it'll focus on the branch in front of the bird sometimes, or most of the time, I should say. Right? And he said, yeah, mine does that too. I said, okay. So I felt a little better, right? And the guy with the Z9, he had a Z9 and his bazooka lens, right? He said, yeah, it's the same. If you got a stick in front of the bird like this, uh, yeah, you're going to focus on the stick or the branch. You're not going to be able to get focus on the bird unless you go down to a single point and kind of work your way around, or it might eventually get it, or you make sure your depth of field is what it is, what it needs to be, yada, yada. Uh, but he was, that, so it was an interesting and sort of confirmation that the OM1 is doing a great job, because and that the Sony A1 and the Z9 also do a great job. You know, cost aside, money no object, cost aside, right? Because obviously the guy's walking around. God, what is a 300 f4 or 600 f4 cost? Sony 600 mm f4. Okay. Holy crap. $13,000 lens. All right. This is what he had. And what's the Sony A1? Sony A1 is $25. No. Oh, here it is. $6,500. Holy crap. And then you add, we're talking like $20,000 in gear. I mean, holy crap. I had no idea it was that expensive. I can't believe he let me hold it. I would be, man, if I had that camera and lens, I'd be like, don't touch my stuff. Nobody touches my gear, let alone hold it. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. $19,500. Man, that thing better focus right. Oh my God. That is shocking. Uh oh, hey Caitlin, how are you? I hope you came in the beginning when I was showing the different pictures between the images, and you shouldn't have any doubt about buying the 75 to 300 if you haven't bought it yet. It's a terrific lens. But oh my God, it's just funny. I thought I just mentioned that we're not the only one. The OM system is not the only one having a problem with a bird and branches in front of it. You still have to resort, and that's a workflow I'm trying to get used to. What was weird is when I put my camera into continuous autofocus plus manual focus, because I wanted to practice a little bit of that today. It wouldn't let me do magnification. It would do peaking, but not magnification. And it said it was because of the shutter mode I was in. I don't know. I got to work out a workflow where I can quickly switch to manual focus when I'm doing birding, because it happens enough that I need to have a workflow specifically for that kind of birding where it's behind a branch. Because birds in flight, I got a workflow that I'm going to share. Once I work in the manual focus part, I think I got all the bases covered, and then I'm going to go in the field and practice this workflow and see if it goes smoothly. I'm pretty excited about being able to share the settings I'm using with the OM1 for birds in flight, birds in a tree, birds behind a branch, the typical kind of birding you're going to do. And as I get more experience, maybe there'll be other situations I can help with in terms of settings. But for now, I can do a video on my workflow for birds in flight, birds in a tree, and then it won't be too long before I get birds behind a stick type photography. But okay. User peaking CF plus MF tog. Hold on, there was something here. I use peaking with CF plus MF tog to get bird behind the branch. Yeah, I need to work workflow. I think I can use the lever switch for that. But once I get a workflow down, because once you get your workflow down, then you can build up your muscle memory, and then when you're out in the field, you're going to be like a freaking ninja or whatever, like a professional with your camera. Click, 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 and bird does this, and you're like just a click away, and you're in that right mode and right setting, right? Well, what's funny is when I went out with David Crooks yesterday to Harper's Ferry, man, I was struggling with composition, and because I'm like a street architectural guy, right? And I was struggling because I haven't done like street photography in a long time. It's been 6 weeks. I mean, I have not taken a picture of nothing other than birds for the last 6 weeks. And going back to composing for the street and taking pictures of buildings and roads and stuff, I was like a newbie. I was like, I don't know what I was like twice. It's very surreal going back to that, like a focal length less than 300 millimeters. um, it was kind of funny. So, but I'm just so excited about the OM1's autofocusing getting me the shots that I could never do before easily, that I want to get good at it. And just that's what I'm going to focus on. And now that the weather's nice, so here's all of that. But okay, everyone, I'm going to call it here. I really appreciate you guys coming in today. Um, it's always a pleasure, and I hope I provided some value and some insight and help you make decisions today on the 75 to 300 versus the 300 f4. They're both fabulous lenses. Um, Certainly, I have my affiliate links down below. If you're interested in those lenses, it helps me out, as well as any donations you guys can make. And thank you so much for the donations. Some of you have already sent. I really appreciate it. There was some nice ones in there too, which are great. And I'm going to send an email out to you personally thanking you. So thanks for that. But as always, it's great to see you again. And I will be back on Thursday, hopefully with some more tips or ideas. I'll think of something. But you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.